Good evening, everyone. We'll start in about 1 minute. So exactly at 6 o'clock. Hope you are all logged in and ready to go. Okay, it's exactly 6 o'clock. Can we kick off? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Africa Day edition of ETTP Entrepreneurship to the Point. My name is Fazlin Taufi, and I will introduce the session to you this evening and kick off proceedings. As I'm sure you know, Entrepreneurship to the Point is intended to inform, equip, and inspire. And this evening, we're looking to do that through the conversation around the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. And this evening's discussion is around the fact that it's 1 year in, and what has been the experience and what has been the view of the agreement from the viewpoint of an entrepreneur, from the viewpoint of a consultant who works in import and export on the continent, and from the viewpoint of an economist. But I will leave all of those introductions and those conversations to our facilitator for the evening. Her name is Mapefo Sipula. Mapefo works at Property Point with me. She is a developmental economist whose goal is to make a positive contribution towards Africa's economy through transformation in everything that she does. And at Property Point, we're really proud of the work that Mapefo does because we see the inroads that she's making and we're making as a result of that in transforming Africa's economy. So Mapefo, thank you for the work that you do and thank you for hosting this evening. I will hand over to you to run with things for this evening. Thanks, Mapefo.
Thanks so much, Baz, and thanks for the introduction. Just good evening, everyone, and good evening to the panelists and everyone who's joined us this evening. Let me take this opportunity just to say Happy Africa Month to everyone. So I'm a bit jealous about Baz's neck piece. I think I might be taking that off your hands soon. So let me just start by saying, with the Africa's 2063 agenda, really what's central to it is around ensuring a prosperous Africa that is inclusive and ensures sustainable development. And one of the key pillars to achieving this objective has been the implementation of the African Free Trade Agreement. And as Faz has mentioned, it's just a little over a year since it's been implemented. It's one of the largest free trade areas in the world, purely based on the number of countries that are currently participating with an African Free Trade Agreement. That's President Paul Kagame of Rwanda, who once said that today more than ever, collaboration amongst African countries is not a choice, it is an imperative. And so the African Free Trade Agreement really aims to create a single market for goods and services, facilitated by the movement of people to promote industrial development and sustainable and inclusive socio-economic growth, as well as just to deepen economic integration on the continent. The African Union is really aiming to achieve 50% inter-regional trade by 2030. And with 80% of entrepreneurs being SMEs will be central to be achieving this goal of an integrated Africa. So it's noted that there are several opportunities that are presented to the African Free Trade Agreement, really citing the 1 billion potential in terms of consumers, and also the market worth of 3 trillion in terms of annual GDP. So really to delve into some of the impacts of the agreement since its implementation and some of the opportunities that are presenting themselves for SMEs, and the experience of entrepreneurs who've actually been able to venture into the continent, I'm really excited to introduce to you our panelists for this evening. So we've got Duncan Bonnet, the Director of Market Access and Research at Africa House, who unfortunately is not on the line today, but earlier this week, we were able to do a bit of pre-recording with him for him just to share some of these insights and nuggets on doing work with businesses wanting to scale in the continent. We've got Lynn Mashonga, the CEO of Global Security Solutions, as well as Phumlani Madjoza, who's a macroeconomic analyst, writer, and commentator on economic, political, and global issues. So at this moment, I'd like to say good evening to Glenn and Phumlani. Welcome to ETTP.
Good evening, Mapelo, Mapefo. It's good to be back. We've engaged before, so it's great to be back.
Great.
Hi, good evening. Good evening, everybody.
Great to have you on the station. Maybe we can just start off if maybe you can just introduce yourself and really tell us a little bit about the work that you are currently doing on the continent and your experience on the continent, just as an intro. Perhaps we can start with yourself, Phumlani.
Glenn is the ladies first.
Ladies
Okay.
first.
Hi, everybody. I'm Glenn Mashonga, owner of Globescope Security Solutions. We operate in the ICT sector, providing full turnkey security solutions. We also have a guarding division. We have a accredited training center for SASITA and SERA. Our footprint, we're national, and we've also just opened a branch in Zambia.
Thanks so much, Glenn. Maybe self, Phumlani.
Yeah, so from my side, I'm more of a commentator, a writer, as you said, Mapefo. I also advise international companies that invest in Africa, mostly Western companies. So that means I have to keep up with the political and economic trends, study the markets, even more so with respect to South Africa, which is the most sort of sophisticated economy in the continent and more advanced. So there is much focus in South Africa relative to other countries. That tends to be the trend. So that's mainly my work, and that is why I'm here this evening.
Thanks so much, Glenn. Thanks so much, Phumlani. I'm really looking forward to our engagement this evening. I'd really just like to remind everyone, please post your questions on the chat, and we'll also field those questions to our panelists during our session this evening. I think we're just going to start off, as I mentioned earlier, Duncan couldn't be with us this evening, but he did share some of his nuggets, and we will be sharing some of his insights in terms of working on the continent and supporting entrepreneurs in building their expansion strategies. So sure, Baz, you'll be sharing the video. Seems like we're having a bit of a challenge kind of playing the video.
Will you please just bear with us for a second? As luck would have it, technology is such that when you do a dry run, it works. And the minute we go live, we have an issue. We're just working on it in the background. But while we do that, maybe we'll ask Duncan in his absence to introduce himself in a few minutes, Maps, if you don't mind me just quickly interjecting. Perhaps we're working on it in the background, so perhaps just flow with the event or the questions, and we'll come back in a few minutes with Duncan's video.
Okay, no problem. I think maybe we can just jump straight to you, Glenn, and maybe you can tell us some about your experience in Zambia. So, you know, why did
Maps,
you
you're still on mute?
Oh. Yeah. So I was just asking, you know, just in terms of your experience of working in Zambia, so how did the opportunity come about? And what were some of the steps that you took to kind of get into Zambia?
Yes, so we were informed about an opportunity in Zambia in the security sector. We then sent out, and this happened via our networks. Then we sent out 2 of our company representatives to go and do the groundwork and to go and see what is out there, if we are interested, if it will work. And also for them to find a Zambian partner for us, because in Zambia you have to have a Zambian partner to register a business. Once they have done all the groundwork and all of that, we only went through to go and assess and meet the Zambian partners.
Oh, great. So what are, like, you know, so you've got like the partners. What are some of the other kind of key things that you had to have in place kind of going into the Zambian market?
Yeah, so we had to register the business and in Zambia, and also open the bank accounts. Before we came to Zambia, they've already set out meetings with the government for us. We met the Minister of Mines, the Minister of Commerce, and also the Minister of Small and Medium Businesses. They've welcomed us with open hands, and they said they welcome these investments into their country, and they're extremely happy for us to be there. Yeah, so we had to do that first. It was a bit daunting because you have to now follow, you know, their lead on most of the things. But luckily our company is ISO certified, so to start implementing and, you know, replicating, it's quite easy to do it in the Zambian market, because they're more or less the same, you know, laws and stuff like we have. So that was easy.
So with kind of, you know, having the similarities between South Africa and Zambia, that's kind of been able to make the journey a little bit more easier.
Yeah.
Would you advise, you know, kind of entrepreneurs also kind of looking into that and showing like similarities between countries kind of going into?
Yes, I find when you're a small business, it's easier to have that similarities, because you're not going into something that's really, really different, you know. And having a Zambian partner, the language and the culture and all of those things plays a big role when you employ people and stuff like that. So that was for us very important to have had the Zambian partner with us. We at the moment busy getting premises. Because we're in the security guarding industry, it is very good for us to have an office in Lusaka and also at the Copperbelt. So we're looking at having 2 offices there to be closest, closer to the mines.
And, you know, like, I know not all journeys are easy. There are some stumbling blocks and challenges. What kind of, what has been your overall experience and some of the challenges that you've kind of faced kind of operating and working in a different country?
I think us as South Africans mustn't be scared to take the leap, because when I met the government and the way they were so extremely happy to see us, and they look at South Africa in that high regard. I thought to myself, why didn't I do it long time? You know, I could have been doing it for a few years now, you know, so I actually can kick myself that I didn't do it earlier. But I think it's not too late. There's a new government now for about, I think, 9 months now, and they very much wanting to employ youth and that. And in the guarding industry, we can employ you know, a lot of people and feed a lot of families. So it will be easier for us in the type of business we are bringing there to do that. So they're extremely excited.
And just in terms of something that I know you've mentioned, like partners being quite critical and important, what are some of the other things that have been kind of critical to kind of your success operating within the Zambian market?
So just the I'm just a bit concerned regarding, you know, with the bank account and stuff like that. So how do you, is it easy to transfer money? How does it work? You know, how long must you keep money in there? That type of thing, you know, so I've got questions around that. And I think to also find a good premises where we can also build a training center in order to train and, you know, do the proper due diligence in that part. So that is quite a concern for us at the moment. That's why it's taking a while now to get a property where we can also build a training center as well.
Maybe just one last question on my end, you know, what did, you know, before kind of going into Zambia, how did you know that you were ready to kind of expand into kind of a new market and expand, you know, across borders, you know?
We are national at the moment, so I think if you can do it in your own country and you can go to PE or you can go to KZN and operate there, I think by doing that first is a good learning curve because management structures, I mean, you can't be everywhere as an owner, so you have to be able to trust people and all of that. So I think by doing that a few years now, I think it is time for me to move over across borders.
Okay, thanks so much, Glenn. I think you've really given us some real insights, you know, really being able to know that, you know, if you can do it in your country and you've got your systems in place, and, you know, you've got people that you can trust, you know that you're starting to be able to really to scale. And I think maybe at this point, maybe be a good opportunity to maybe bring you in, Phumlani, because I don't think the video is ready as yet. You know, it has been kind of a year since the implementation of the African Free Trade Agreement. Are we seeing any new kind of trends in the impact of African Free Trade Agreement? Are we seeing more entrepreneurs like Glenn who are actually taking up these opportunities of the African Free Trade Agreement?
Well, thanks, Mapefo. Glenn, well done on entering into the into the African space. Well, you know, Mapefo, it's a process, because remember, the projections are that the elimination of tariffs, 90% of them, you know, the elimination of tariffs on 90% of goods and services will happen over 10 years, over a decade. So that means then that's when we can expect to see some material changes that are being brought by, you know, this agreement. What has been happening over the past year has, yes, we've started, you know, affecting the agreement, but there have also been negotiations. There are still negotiations going on, negotiations about competition policy, about investment, about intellectual property, e-commerce, how that will be organized. And also there is a very big issue about what about the free movement of people from one country to another? Should that be part of the deal? We are seeing countries like South Africa and Nigeria, really, they haven't signed up to something like that. And, you know, we have countries that have not signed up to something like that because they see that as a challenge as to how would you have just a free movement of people. They see security as an issue. They see, many fundamental problems that come with at least from their perspective, that come with with people moving freely between the countries. So this is a process, but I must say that this has been a very good idea from our leaders. But then, in order for us as Africans to have full potential or to make the gains, this will need to be accompanied by very fundamental structural reforms within individual countries in the African continent. right? Because if you still have economies that are underproductive, that don't have infrastructure, right, that don't have, you know, good tax policies, we need to increase productivity within individual countries so that we get greater gains from the, you know, the whole from the agreement. So that to me would be critical. And I've said before that how much we gain from this trade deal is dependent on individual countries implementing the reforms that will increase productivity, as well as ensure that we see more people, you know, getting to work. So the right policies will be very important, and that will take courage from our leaders. It will need to take commitment, determination, to do what is best for Africans. Having a deal, it's not enough, right? Having the agreement itself isn't enough. To benefit out of it, to see gains, there has to be fundamental economic reforms in individual countries in the African continent.
So I think what you are raising is really important. So really that African countries really do need to get their house in order for us to really start to see the full potential of the African Free Trade Agreement. You know, and you've kind of mentioned some of the challenges that are presenting themselves in terms of kind of the implementation. You know, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more around, you know, what are some of these challenges? You know, you're mentioning some of the countries that have not signed up onto the agreement. What are some of these challenges that we've been experiencing over the past year in terms of the implementation of African Free Trade?
Well, you will remember that as much as this, we seek to coordinate on this form of economic cooperation, this is also driven by domestic politics, right, in individual countries. Each and every matter that a nation gets engaged in, whether it's in the form of trade or any foreign policy matter, that issue is first debated internally in the country, right? And whatever the decisions that are made by the leaders in the country, they first have to sort of explore the political implications. They will need to do some political, they will need to follow some political process for them to eventually sign up to the deal. You look at Eritrea. Eritrea hasn't signed this agreement. It is largely a closed economy, right? Because of the dynamics of its politics, that has shaped as to when it signs and whether it will sign or not. That will be a determinant. I just mentioned earlier as well about the issue of whether there should be the movement of people between countries moving freely. That itself, the reason why countries like South Africa and Nigeria, they are not really that much into, at least for now, into that is because of the nature, the domestic politics and the domestic sort of dynamics in each and every country. They determine that, and they should. That's how it should work, actually. So there's nothing surprising about that. But my point is, such things, they shape, they basically determine the amount or the extent at which we will have challenges across the African continent when it comes to, or how delayed the process may be in the continent on the actual implementation and seeing benefits from this trade deal. So it's estimated that the combined GDP out of this deal could be as high as $3.4 trillion. Because we are combining 1.3 billion people, basically making it, we're making it, cheap for them to trade between one another, right? To eliminate the costs, to eliminate the tariffs, and to get there, though, it requires, there's a huge amount of work that will have to take place. And the challenges already, they do exist. It's a matter of having leaders who will sort of, look into how do they get their domestic matters in order so that they are able to move forward and participate in the deal itself for the benefit of their people.
So you've mentioned the $3 trillion and the 1.3 billion population. What are some of the opportunities that are really presenting themselves to SMMEs? What are some of the countries and some of the growth sectors that they should be keeping their eye on?
Well, look, I was in Nigeria a few years back, and I must tell you, Mapefo, I was stunned. I was struck by the levels of productivity amongst Nigerians, right? The drive, to be productive in the market. I liked that, and I was speaking to someone not long time ago who was saying that when he went to Nigeria, he saw the same thing. People wanting to participate, to be productive in the market. And I say that you see the same trend also even in other Western countries as well. So the West Africa market, with all its challenges, but you can sense that people there, they are really, look at even the growth rates in countries like Ivory Coast, Ghana. You can see that really in those countries there is that drive, for people to participate in the market, to be productive in it. And when I was in Nigeria, to be frank with you, it was something I don't see in my country, South Africa, right? That drive to participate and produce in the market. And I sensed something there. It was that people have very little faith in the state, the government in Nigeria, the state for them, to provide anything. One guy was telling me that, power goes on and off here often. I'm like, so then what is the state government doing about it? He said, what are you talking about? I mean, yeah, you trade from someone, we buy electricity, life has to move on. There is no expectation from the state that the state is going to fix things, right? They're just, producing, selling in the market, thriving, doing whatever they can to sustain their lives, to sustain their businesses. So, when you look at the West Africa market, yes, it's got security challenges, it's got the fact that it lacks infrastructure and so on and so on. But when it comes to people's productivity and their drive to participate in the market, you can see that these people are driven. And I think that's one area where I'm saying that if things could go right there, we would see this African, trade agreement making an impact, right? Central Africa, I'm quite concerned that I think it's much more worse than the West Africa. So there I'm quite a bit negative, the whole structure of how things are there. East Africa, Kenya is doing quite, and even when you look at fintech investments, Kenya is amongst the countries along with South Africa that are leading in terms of attracting that. So Kenya in East Africa is a country to watch as well. And then here in the South, we also have, Botswana, South Africa, Namibia as well to watch. So, if these regions that I have just, spoken about, if the countries can really commit themselves to making sure that they adopt policies that are pro-growth, pro-market, pro-business, make it easy for business to thrive and grow, that we would see greater gains, in these regions, in the continent.
So I think what is coming out quite strongly, I think there's also an opportunities for entrepreneurs across to learn from each other, and in terms of how they do business as well. I think there's a huge opportunity.
Yes, just to since we've mentioned entrepreneurs, that these markets I have mentioned, they are a big opportunity for SA entrepreneurs, right? To explore, like what Glenn is doing, to explore, to understand, to see how they can, how they can benefit in the market. And Glenn mentioned that the requirement in the country where she's operating was that you need to have a local partner, right? So that scope can grow as well, where we see businesses, entrepreneurs, basically reaching out in those countries, in those regions where they think they can make an impact, to partner, to share insights, to share business expertise, and so on and so on. That can benefit them and us as well, and the entire continent. So lessons are very, very, very much important for SMEs, for them to explore as well those countries, and to be basically to partner with other organizations in other countries in the African continent. That presents a great deal of opportunities.
And when you're thinking around like sectors, I know you've mentioned the regions that we should be looking out for in countries. And from a sectoral perspective, what are some of the sectors, that you're seeing are going to be like new frontiers that, some of these should be?
Well, I think it's very important when you do that, that you understand more what that country is largely producing, right? In other words, what it is that it is good at and is producing, that it exports or sells greatly in its market. Is very important to understand that. But on a larger scale, we all do know that Africa is very much well known for producing raw materials. It's a commodity market, right? That's where you find things like gold, platinum, and so on, oil, countries like Angola and Nigeria, and so on and so on, in the African continent. So we are largely a commodity market. So I would say that the mining is one industry to look at, though it's expensive to get into mining, but because of the nature of Africa. And so raw materials, it's one industry to explore and think about. And then also you look at a fintech, the speed at which fintech is taking shape in Africa. The data is just remarkable. I was looking at this, when you look at the countries that are really sort of attracting an investment in fintech. I mentioned Kenya earlier, but there's also Nigeria, there's also South Africa, there's also Egypt as well is amongst the countries that are really attracting. There is sort of an upward, speedy fintech trend in Africa that is taking place, and it is an opportunity. When you look at Nigeria, is well known for really having a vibrant sort of technological sort of advancement, in the sense that there are many sort of fintech companies, startups that are emerging in Nigeria. Even Mark Zuckerberg, he came to Africa and invested in one of Nigerian companies because he saw potential. Yes, it's a poor country, no doubt, right? It's a much more challenged country than South Africa, but still, because of the potential, the speed at which things are taking place, Mark Zuckerberg did take on the bet. So fintech, no doubt. Mobile banking in Africa is when you look at the trends over the past, you would say 10 years or so, in Africa is leading in terms of mobile banking, the growth of mobile banking, the growth of also, when you look at internet access and so on, the speed at which, though of course we still lag behind, but it's growing in that we are still growing and we are going fast. So that's a positive. So, all those things, mobile banking, fintech, commodities market. South Africa, can look at financial services in South Africa. Financial services in South Africa contributes the biggest chunk. Well, it's amongst the, not mistaken, amongst the biggest sort of contributors to GDP. So we have a very strong financial services sector that you can explore the financials as to how you get in and invest in it. So I mean, those are the areas that SMEs need to look at. No doubt that, of course, whatever you choose as the space you want to get into, you will need to basically look at, is it something that can benefit me over the next decade or so? What are the trends in the country I'm entering? What are the market challenges there in terms of political stability, infrastructure, and so on and so on? levels of education, human capital, and all those things. All those things would need to understand them to decide whether do you really want to go into the market of Angola and invest in it. So understanding that is critical.
And I think you're really highlighting also just for entrepreneurs the importance of due diligence and understanding the market that you are going into. Maybe just the last question before we go into the video for Duncan, I think is ready. How will the African Free Trade Agreement really need to be configured to make sure that SMEs are not left behind and they are actually able to unlock the opportunities that are presented to them?
You see, my opinion is that the objective must be to make this trade agreement as pro-SME as possible, right? Because that is what drives and ought to drive the economies, right? It's it's small to medium enterprises, it's businesses. So the scope of this. So when we talk about the fact that there are still negotiations about the matters of intellectual property, competition policy, e-commerce, and so on, all of this needs to be looked at from a perspective of SMEs, right? Let's remember, just operating in a market, it costs money, right? So we don't want to make it very expensive for companies to, even in individual countries, for the countries to basically be, to operate. We don't want it to make it difficult. It must be as easy as possible. So it begins with the reforms that will make sure that it's pro-SMEs. And this, trade agreement must be as pro-SMEs as possible, because otherwise we are going to have an issue where basically you are going to have big corporate companies surviving and thriving and managing to basically, sustain themselves in that deal, and SMEs, they struggle even just to enter a specific market because of the cost involved. So reducing the costs as much as possible is instrumental in making sure that the deal benefits the SMEs, and it must be a deal, the free trade deal. As negotiations are progressing, the goal must be to ensure that by the end of those negotiations, the greatest beneficiaries of the deal are SMEs. So all these fundamental issues that are being debated, they need to be, finalized and agreed upon from the perspective of SMEs.
Great, thanks so much for that, Phumlani. I think the importance of intentionality and having SMEs in mind, and when we're thinking about these agreements. I think the video is ready, where I think will be actually a great opportunity, because I think it will tie in quite nicely with what Phumlani has been raising. Sure, Faz, if the video is ready. I think we might just be having an issue with
bureaucracy, any of those things that impact on the ability to trade in a region. So we do follow the Continental Free Trade Area quite closely, because it's obviously it's a very, very important part of Africa's development and unlocking more of the potential of the region. I think it's fair to say that it's not really made a huge impact yet on trade in the region, simply because most of the countries or the regional bodies like the East African Community or SACU haven't fully had their articles of implementation ratified yet. So whilst we're a year into the free trade agreement, not much in reality has taken place on the ground in terms of, say, from a South African perspective, gaining a preferential access into markets in West Africa or East Africa, so or vice versa for that matter. So I think, you know, we're still very much in the developmental stage of the agreement. And also, as so far, it's only an agreement in trade of goods, not services. So trade in services will be the next phase of that. And that's a really, really important thing, particularly from a South African perspective, because we have a very strong services sector here. So I think, you know, the short answer is that not really much has changed in terms of opening up access to other regional markets that we didn't already have free trade areas with, or comprehensive free trade with, in terms of SACU and SADC. But the building blocks are there. And I think that we've seen in the last few months that there's been a fair degree of urgency amongst countries that are signed up to see that the implementation is accelerated. So I would think that probably by later this year, at the end of the year by latest, we'll see a much better understanding of who's in, what's happening, and where the process sits. I think just at a broader level, what we have seen, and this is both an opportunity for companies in Africa, but it's also a bit of a threat, is that in many instances, companies from outside of Africa are taking this agreement much more seriously than those within the continent. And so we're starting to see things like automotive suppliers looking and saying, okay, we need to set up regional hubs to take advantage of this. And I think what we need to do as businesses already in Africa and on the continent is to start looking at this and saying, are we going to get left behind by international competition that starts to take advantage of our own trade agreements? Or do we look at it as a real opportunity to create industrialization on the continent? There's always two sides to that story. You know, are existing local businesses under threat by large international corporations with a lot of finance, a lot of muscle and technology coming in and muscling them out of their own markets? Or do we look at it and say, this is very, very welcome international investment into our countries and region that we possibly wouldn't have unlocked without the free trade agreement? In countries like Uganda, for instance, which is a brand new oil and gas market, there's at a top level, you've obviously got the global international oil companies like Total, CNOOC from China, that are developing this. The EPCs, the key engineering, procurement, and construction companies are all foreign as well. But that said, a lot of the on-the-ground service supply is being generated out of Uganda and to a degree out of Kenya and Tanzania as well. So you're seeing in things like logistics and environmental and social impact assessments, those are largely being done by local companies in those markets. And they're not, you know, by global standards, they are pretty small. So there is opportunity at those levels for our companies to engage with global suppliers when they come into markets. And I think global companies have a realization and an understanding that they don't understand markets that they're new to. Not specifically African markets, but if you're let's say a French multinational and you decide to open a factory in India, it would be the same thing. You need local skills, local service providers to ease your way into those markets. So there are opportunities for small businesses. Also as suppliers of not just services, but of goods and equipment, everything through the value chain, from cement to structural steel, to filters, valves, all sorts of technologies that are available in the region already and that we should be looking at to exploit in those processes. So from a small business perspective, the Continental Free Trade Area can unlock opportunity, but I think small businesses really need to look at how they approach the Continental Free Trade Area. We see too many small companies that are enamored by the idea of exporting, without understanding that exporting, just by its nature, as soon as goods are destined to go cross-border, you're adding expense, you're adding time, and you are also then potentially are adding a distance between your manufacture and the time to get paid. As soon as you go across the border, you've got to look at things like logistics. You've got to look at just the physical time that it takes to get goods into other countries. You've got to look at the legal structures, the payment structures. If you're demanding 100% payment at the factory gate, are you going to be competitive versus suppliers in other regions who will give importers 60 days payment? If you offer 60 to 90 days payment, do you have the balance sheet to be able to cope with that? So I think before companies look and say, we're going to export, and Nigeria's got 210 million people. So, if everyone buys one of our widgets, we're selling 210 million widgets a year. No, it doesn't work that way because there's intense competition globally. There's increasingly domestic competition in markets across the continent. And you have to understand that exporting by its nature is more costly. It's more time consuming. You have to have staff that understand export markets. We find that there are too many companies that try and wing it. And I'm not talking about SMEs. I'm talking about large South African corporates who don't have dedicated export staff that are trained properly to understand what export markets are all about. So I think, it's an exciting space to be in as an SME. But it also means that you really need to understand your products, the suitability of your products for new markets, and how you access them without putting your original business proposition at risk. If you're not successful in a domestic market, chances are you will struggle in an export market. So I think companies need to understand that before they start just rushing out there and trying to conquer the continent. I think there are areas of opportunity. We're a micro enterprise at Africa House. And yet we have collectively worked in 45 of the 49 sub-Saharan African markets. So, being a micro enterprise or a small enterprise or an entrepreneur doesn't stop you doing business across the region if you have the right products or services. I think that's the first point. The second point is always, find a good partner in the market that you're targeting. Nobody knows that market better than the person in it. You can search the internet and look at social media as much as you like, and you can get quite well informed. But you also need to find that partner that matches your ambition and what you're looking for. And there are sectors across the continent that I think offer really good opportunities. We've been working on a UK-funded project called Trade Forward Southern Africa at the moment, which is looking at how to increase intra-regional trade in things like cosmetics, in value-added food products, being able to get small but export-ready companies into the value chains across the region, and not just in Southern Africa, but globally. So being able to, if you are producing a very good input into the cosmetics industry, whether you're in Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, or anywhere else on the continent, there are buyers in Europe and the US and Asia who want those products, assuming they jump through all the regulatory hurdles and so on. And I think that's something that we need to start understanding, is that, yes, it's a big global market out there, but niche suppliers of niche products and services, and obviously as smaller businesses, generally tend to be a lot more nimble and able to reach decisions more quickly than large corporates. You have that opportunity to find those niches in different markets. So I've mentioned food and beverages as one, cosmetics and healthcare products, particularly natural and organic ingredients as other ones. And developing those value chains, I think is a really exciting space to be in. And you can develop them not necessarily always by simply trying to export yourself, but looking at some of our large retail groups like ShopRite, Woolworths, Spar, Game and so on, who have a footprint in other African markets as a starting point for entry into those. And so I think that, you look at Africa as a continent that has a young population, it has a dynamic population, it has an increasingly, at one level, international population. So the younger Africans who are all accessing the internet and social media and so on are looking at global trends and at one level saying, we want to be part of that. But at another level, we want an African twist to it. And somebody producing in China or New York or Germany doesn't understand that African twist that is wanted. So I think, there are so many opportunities through that value chain that can be exploited and used across many industries, not just in the FMCG sector, but even in things like engineering, architecture, the development of those kinds of skill sets, training of staff across the board. We always say that when you sell something in Africa, you're selling a solution. You're not just selling a product. So if you are an entrepreneur in the engineering space, you would look at that and say, I want to do projects in X, Y, or Z country. What I need to do is find out what are the opportunities there, who do I partner with, and then work on what are our mutual strengths and weaknesses and opportunities that we can then look at to work on together, so that rather than me just trying to battle against the global headwinds on my own, I've actually got a better understanding of those markets and the opportunities in them. So I think, you would never say that other markets are closed to entrepreneurs, because every big company was started by an entrepreneur at some stage in the past. And as we've seen over the years, not every big company survives. Other companies come up more aggressive, more innovative. And that really is where the opportunity is understanding markets, understanding the innovations that are required, and then rolling up your sleeves, getting out there and fighting for your space.
Thanks, Faz. So I think he makes a really nice statement around that African entrepreneurs must remember that they're not just selling a product, they're selling a service, and that, there are opportunities. And I think Phumlani also mentioned it quite strongly around the opportunities that are present, but there are realities to doing business in Africa, and the things that you need to consider. And Glenn, you mentioned them briefly in terms of kind of payments. So maybe at this, just in closing, to get your thoughts, Phumlani and Glenn, just to share some tips. Yeah.
I like what Duncan said when you were saying that, could it be possible that we are having foreign companies, making use of the free trade agreement much way better than us as Africans? And that's what we need to watch here, that they see this opportunity, foreign big companies, and they make use of it, and then we are left behind, right? And that should be avoided. And I think part of the as part of the implementation process, I think, and this I say just according to my observation, I don't see much drive and the state or government creating awareness on the importance of this free trade deal. So I just think that awareness from government to say that here's a deal, take the opportunity to use it as SMEs, as business people, and then you should also, even yourselves as the private sector, spread the message, right? Whether it's in banking, whether it's in our oil companies, whether it's in, in tourism and so on, we have to spread the word that here's a free trade agreement, and we as Africans need to make sure that we are number one in terms of making use of the opportunity and in terms of benefiting from it. Because we are going to reach a point again where, even though we've created these conditions that ought to benefit us more, we will be complaining and saying, but I mean, why is the West here? Why are the Chinese here to exploit and so on? They're still trying to colonize us, and so we shouldn't reach that point where we keep on complaining, right? We must reach a point where we are saying, you know what, we created this environment and we are leading, we are getting the greater benefit out of it. And that will take the determination and courage and the seriousness from us as citizens and leaders in Africa.
Thanks, Pumlani. I think building awareness around the African Free Trade Agreement is so important. I think the train is leaving the station and we need to make sure that SMEs are on the train and don't get left behind. So maybe just to end off with you, Glenn, maybe some tips and how entrepreneurs can really start to gear themselves up for these opportunities and take up these opportunities. Maybe you can share some tips for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, like I said, they need a solid base in SA and also the right capacity and a solid understanding of the local market. That's very important. Joining up with a local partner, like I said before, that is the way to go. They understand their market, they understand their people, and it's easier for you to infiltrate in that market if you follow those steps. And don't be scared, guys. It's not so daunting. Just do it. Let's just do it.
Yeah, I think that's the most important slogan. I think we've all grown up that slogan. Just do it, right?
Just do it. Don't think. Do it.
Don't think too much. I think we've reached the end of our session. I really want to just thank our panelists for all their insights and sharing their experience. I think there's great opportunities on the African Free Trade Agreement. But really it's important just to do your due diligence, think around the right partners you should be collaborating with. But yes, I'd really like to thank everyone who's joined us today and thank the panelists once again. I think I'll hand over to Baz just to close off.
Thanks, Mapefo, and thank you to everybody else on the panel. Thank you to Duncan in his absence. For all of you just bringing so much insight. This was a really rich conversation. And we love the fact that it now lives forever on YouTube. We'll be sharing that YouTube on our social media channels, and we invite our panelists to do the same thing. We are available on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube as Entrepreneurship to the Point, and then on Twitter and Instagram, E to the Point. And then I asked each of our panelists if they would like to avail themselves for any questions or any opportunities that those watching now or in the future would like to reach out to them to ask questions, have a conversation, and each of them said yes. So Glenn can be reached at info@globescope.co.za. Duncan can be reached at duncan@africainfo.co.za. And Pumlani can be reached at www.pumlanimajosi.com. So that's pumlanimajosi.com. And he's also available on all social media as Pumlani M. Majosi. With that said, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We do hope that we stuck true to our promise tonight, which is to inform, equip, and inspire. And to Mapefo Sipula, thank you so much for holding the space this evening, for really synthesizing so well what each of our panelists have said. And with not much further ado, I'd like to close the session and just thank everybody again for your generosity of spirit and time. Thank you, and see you at the next session.